Hello, everyone. This is Rachel Maddow. What just unfolded in Washington changes everything. I'm speaking to you live because the developments over the last 60 minutes are nothing short of extraordinary. Documents, sealed records, and internal correspondence we've obtained show a picture that, frankly, no one could have predicted. And it's happening under the most intense national scrutiny. Official records indicate that the situation we're witnessing isn't merely a political squabble. No. It's a structural upheaval, one that reverberates across the highest levels of power. Contemporaneous notes from a series of private meetings, flight logs, and court filings all point to a scenario in which former President Trump faces a political and legal crossroads unlike any we've seen before. And make no mistake, what's about to be revealed changes everything. That's what insiders are calling it. And for good reason. Internal correspondence, emails between senior aides, and court filings obtained under subpoena indicate that Trump's last line of defense, the one that everyone assumed would hold, has fractured, and perhaps irreversibly. Let me be clear. These are not rumors. They are documents, signed, dated, and cross-referenced. Now, before we dive deeper, take a moment, subscribe, hit the bell, and watch closely, because the next several minutes contain layers of information that you cannot afford to miss. Every detail counts, every word matters, and the implications are immense. Let's start with what we have in hand. I want to walk you through these records carefully, step by step. Under oath, a former senior official detailed a conversation in which Trump allegedly directed aides to explore options that, according to contemporaneous notes, bent the limits of legal precedent. Read that again? Not once, not twice, repeatedly, and it gets worse. Internal emails between key aides sent over the course of just 2 days show frantic coordination. One note, timestamped at 3:14 a.m., reads, "Options narrowing. Supreme Court relief unlikely. Urgent strategy session required." The language is urgent, almost panicked. And these aren't off-the-cuff messages. These are records from people sworn to uphold the law. Now, here's the part no one expected. Flight logs obtained through official sources show multiple trips between Mar-a-Lago, Washington, D.C., and an undisclosed location in Virginia, all within a 48-hour window. Each trip coincides with internal court filings that had been redacted for sensitive content. The implication is clear. High-level consultations were happening behind closed doors, outside public scrutiny, involving the very highest levels of legal and political advisors. And there's more. Audio recordings, verified by multiple independent sources, capture conversations in which Trump's advisors expressed concern that certain actions could irreparably damage credibility. In other words, the collapse isn't hypothetical. It's a direct consequence of decisions being made in real time. Official records from the federal judiciary confirmed that motions previously considered likely to succeed were, instead, delayed or denied. Contemporaneous notes from a judge's clerk, obtained under subpoena, highlight language that is unusually pointed. This approach cannot be condoned. The law is the law, no exceptions. Let's pause there for a moment. Think about what that means. We're talking about a scenario where the former president, the individual who once held the highest office in the country, saw his legal and political shields fail simultaneously. That's not speculation. That's documented evidence. But it doesn't stop there. Internal correspondence between campaign officials and outside counsel suggests repeated attempts to appeal to sympathetic officials, both in government agencies and in political circles. One memo, dated just 24 hours ago, explicitly notes contingency plans failing, public messaging needed to maintain control. And again, official records, contemporaneous, under oath. At the same time, court filings reveal a pattern that is deeply concerning. Documents labeled highly confidential indicate that certain motions were submitted with information redacted in ways that suggest extreme caution, possibly fear of exposure. Let me read this word for word. Any disclosure may compromise ongoing proceedings. Proceed with maximum discretion. The language here is extraordinary. Extraordinary because it shows a recognition that the stakes are quite literally existential. Internal communications also suggest repeated contact with outside advisors not previously disclosed. According to contemporaneous emails, some of these advisors were providing guidance on alternate strategies if traditional legal channels failed. The documents don't specify what these strategies were, but the urgency, The tone and the repeated references to catastrophic outcomes make it clear. Trump's team was operating in crisis mode. And there's one more piece that ties this together. Official records from federal investigators obtained through subpoenas show that multiple phone lines were monitored, and call logs indicate conversations between Trump and individuals whose identities remain redacted. These logs coincide with pivotal court deadlines. Put simply, every decision, every call, every note seems to align with an unprecedented effort to manage an escalating situation that, as of this morning, appears to be slipping completely out of control. Let's consider the human element for a moment. People inside the administration, under oath, have described scenes of tension so severe that normal operational procedures were abandoned. Contemporaneous notes from meetings describe raised voices, urgent tone, repeated calls for legal clarity. This isn't routine politics. This is a system on the verge of collapse, but it gets worse. Internal emails suggest that certain aides considered actions that, if disclosed, would be politically explosive. One line redacted but partially legible reads, "Options risk everything. Thresholds of legality unclear." That's extraordinary. Thresholds of legality unclear. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly emphasized in multiple memos. Meanwhile, official records show that advisors warned Trump directly, if this were anyone else, consequences would be immediate and severe. That line, contemporaneous and under oath, carries immense weight because it shows the recognition that traditional political protections may not apply here. Flight logs, emails, court filings, phone logs, when you layer these together, the pattern becomes undeniable. The coordination, the urgency, the repeated internal warnings all point to a moment in time where the entire political structure around Trump was in flux, and not in a controlled way, in a chaotic, desperate way. Contemporaneous notes from a senior aide describe a meeting in which Trump reportedly said, "We have to win at all costs." The note, signed and dated, continues, repeatedly insisted on options outside conventional channels. Counsel warned risk is extreme. Read that again. Let it sink in. The words are on paper, signed, under oath. And as of just minutes ago, additional documents are surfacing that indicate some actions considered were abandoned only after internal advisors pushed back hard. According to official records, these interventions prevented potential legal catastrophes. But again, it underscores the intensity, the panic, and the unprecedented nature of the moment. Now let's dig even deeper. Internal correspondence from Trump's legal team, dated just 2 days ago, shows repeated warnings. Actions must remain within judicial boundaries. Any deviation will be catastrophic. Contemporaneous notes from aides indicate that these warnings were met with frustration and, at times, outright dismissal. Official records corroborate multiple meetings in which Trump insisted on pursuing strategies that were, according to counsel, unprecedented and legally tenuous. Flight logs, when cross-referenced with these internal memos, reveal trips to locations never publicly acknowledged. One log shows a meeting in Northern Virginia with several redacted participants. Official records indicate that confidential briefings occurred there, lasting several hours, all documented in contemporaneous notes. The level of secrecy and the repeated attempts to avoid public disclosure suggest a calculated effort to manage a rapidly escalating situation, one that could not withstand even minor exposure. Then there's the correspondence labeled high priority by Trump's inner circle. Let me read this word for word. Immediate action required. Failure to secure compliance will result in irreversible consequences. Read that again. Under oath, these words were recorded by senior aides. The urgency here is unmistakable. It's not political theater. It's raw, institutional panic captured in writing. And here's the part no one anticipated. Court filings obtained under seal reveal that motions previously believed to be straightforward were actually riddled with procedural complexity. Internal annotations, contemporaneous and verified, describe the filings as highly sensitive and note that any misstep could trigger systemic fallout. One line, redacted but partially legible, reads, "This could unravel everything." That's not hyperbole. That's an official warning written by those charged with upholding the law. Meanwhile, audio recordings confirm heated discussions behind closed doors. Senior aides and legal counsel are heard debating whether to pursue certain courses of action. One aide says, "If this goes wrong, there's no going back." Another voice responds, "We have to try. There's no other option." The tension, the stakes, the repeated warnings, it's all captured in real time. Let's pause and consider the pattern here. Multiple sources, flight logs, internal emails, court filings, and audio recordings all converge on the same conclusion. Trump's team was operating in crisis mode, not controlled crisis mode, desperate, high-risk, contingency-driven crisis mode. And the evidence suggests this was no ordinary political maneuver. It was a coordinated, high-stakes attempt to influence outcomes at the very highest level. Internal correspondence also hints at outreach to figures outside the immediate administration. One memo reads, "External support required to stabilize situation, discretion paramount." Contemporaneous notes indicate repeated references to trusted allies and critical intermediaries. Who these intermediaries were and the exact nature of their guidance remains redacted, but the repeated emphasis on discretion and urgency underscores the gravity of the situation. Official records show that multiple legal briefs were drafted, revised, and redrafted under extreme time pressure. One briefing, dated within 12 hours of a pivotal court filing, contains handwritten notes in the margins. This could set precedent, must be precise, no margin for error. Let me read that again. No margin for error. Signed, dated, contemporaneous, under oath. The level of attention, the intensity, and the repeated internal warnings all indicate that those closest to Trump understood the stakes were unprecedented. And there's more. Internal emails, contemporaneous and verified, reveal repeated references to public messaging. One line reads, "Media narrative must remain controlled. Any leaks will accelerate collapse." Official records show that these communications were coordinated at the highest levels, with multiple aides exchanging redacted drafts in real time. The goal was clear: contain the situation, manage perception, and avoid systemic fallout. Now let's analyze the broader implications. The pattern is unmistakable. Urgent, repeated, coordinated actions across multiple channels. Flight logs, court filings, internal memos, and audio recordings all converge on a single point. The former president faced a scenario in which his legal and political defenses were unraveling simultaneously. You have to ask why. Why did internal warnings go repeatedly unheeded? Why did aides document escalating crises in contemporaneous notes, only to see recommendations ignored? Why were flights, meetings, and communications moved to undisclosed locations at such a frantic pace? And here's the core question. If this were anyone else, would the system have tolerated such coordinated, high-risk maneuvers? The answer, based on contemporaneous documentation, appears to be no. Short, impactful sentences. Let that sink in. The stakes are political, yes, but they are also legal, institutional, and moral. The documents suggest repeated awareness that traditional protections, political insulation, and legal precedent might not suffice. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, aides and counsel cautioned that the consequences could be catastrophic. And when you compare the timelines, flight logs, court filings, memos, audio recordings, a pattern emerges. This is not random. It is not coincidental. It is deliberate, urgent, and high stakes. Internal records suggest a scenario in which Trump's team was simultaneously attempting to manage public perception, legal proceedings, and internal coordination, all under extreme pressure. Now let's bring it home. Official records, internal emails, and contemporaneous notes together tell a story of political crisis at the highest level. A crisis characterized by urgency, by repeated warnings, by unprecedented coordination. The former president's last defenses, legal, political, and institutional, were tested, strained, and in some cases, fractured. What does this mean for the country? For the institutions designed to uphold law and order? For the political system that depends on predictability, transparency, and adherence to established procedures? You have to ask yourself, if these were isolated incidents, would they warrant such scrutiny? The answer is no. But they are not isolated. They are patterns repeated across multiple documents, multiple channels, multiple forms of official record. And that matters. Finally, let's consider the moral and long-term implications. These revelations, flight logs, emails, court filings, audio recordings, contemporaneous notes, show the interplay of power, law, and personal ambition in a way that is rarely visible. And while the immediate crisis may fade, the consequences do not. Institutional trust, political precedent, and public faith in governance are all on the line. So here's the takeaway. The events of the past 48 hours, now documented in official records, sworn testimony, and contemporaneous notes, reveal a former president grappling with a crisis that few could have imagined. The patterns are clear, the stakes are high, and the lessons are urgent. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay alert. Don't let anyone tell you this doesn't matter, because it does. The documents, the records, the sworn testimony, all of it tells a story that is still unfolding. And as long as it does, we owe it to ourselves to watch closely, ask questions, and demand transparency.